Hey guys, what I'd like to do in this video is give you all the ultimate mod list to make sieges and strong points in this game be the best that they can be. I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction so you can decide for yourself whether the rest of this video is worth your time or not. Then most of the video is going to be talking about the mods themselves, both what they do inside the game mechanics, but also theoretically why these changes are improvements over vanilla. As always, I welcome your feedback. Let me and everyone else know if you're using these mods and what your experience is with them, and whether there are others you might recommend as well. What I'm going to cover are the things I consider the most important improvements that mods can make to the game, but obviously we all have some differing opinions, so feel free to make this video a launching point for further discussion. Now, I've pretty much dedicated this channel to making this game more realistically challenging, largely through combining mods that improve parts of the base game that are what I would call suboptimal. The most successful video I've ever done on this channel I did a few months ago called Why You Need a Garrison Mod. And I think the success of that video, shows how aware so many players are of the deficiencies in vanilla Warhammer when it comes to the need to have strategic strong points in the game. I won't rehash all the points I made in that video, but I'll summarize by saying it's the absence of defenses that turns the game into the bland, always aggressive, snowballing campaign experience that makes every campaign feel over before you get to mid-game. Obviously, some players prefer the fast and unstrategic pacing of vanilla, and that's fine. You're probably not going to like the rest of this video if that's the case, so I can hopefully save you some time by making that clear up front. But for everyone who wants some real strategy in their strategy game, there are some mods you should know about that vastly improve the deficiencies in vanilla, and I'll cover the basics in this video. There are some longtime staples that I've mentioned in other videos, plus there are some new ones to add as well. Now, quick note, I know not all problems can be fixed with mods. As far as I'm aware, there are no mods that fix the gate bug or the brain dead pathfinding, but these things can at least be mitigated with more impactful siege equipment, which is one of the things that we'll get into in this video. Note also that there are a few overhaul mods like SFO and Total War Legacy and Hecleus Grand Strategy that incorporate some of these same ideas. The mods I list here are at the very least going to have some overlap with those overhauls, and in many cases will be incompatible. So if you do use an overhaul, you should check to make sure they work together. I cannot cover every combination in one video, so these recommendations are assuming you're starting from vanilla without an overhaul. I'll make one exception to that. I haven't tested it, but I suspect these mods will all work with Sayla's overhaul. If any of you can confirm or reject that, please let me know in the comments. One final note, this video is focused on sieges and strong points, but that doesn't mean there aren't other mods I use to improve battles in general and other aspects of the campaign. I can't include everything in one video or it would potentially go on for hours. Also, I may be willing to put the mods I talk about in this video into a Steam Workshop collection if there's enough interest in that, so let me know in the comments if that's something you'd like. With all that out of the way, let's get into the mods themselves. I'm going to break my recommended mods up into two categories, those that change mechanics and those that change garrison composition. For the most part, all of these are mix and matchable. If you want to use some of them but not others, you can probably do so without problem. And so with no further ado, let's go ahead and talk about these mods themselves. The first couple are ones that I have talked about before, so I'm not going to spend a real long time on them, but I do highly recommend them still. The first one is No Real-Time Building Reborn. This is by Lamakazi, and what this does is it does exactly what it says on the tin, right? So There's not the little mini game of tower defense where you're building towers in the middle of fighting the battle. Instead, the presumption is towers and barricades and things like that are already built before the battle begins. So you get a little bit of extra supplies with which to build those things before the battle begins, and then you don't get any more during the battle, and you can't build things in the middle of the battle. To me, it's a vast improvement and realistic as well. The next one I'm going to recommend is Tougher Siege Tweaks. Again, this is one I've talked about plenty of times before. This actually does quite a few things. I'm not going to cover them all right here, but it does make changes to towers, ladders, gates and tower capture, morale, capture points, things like that. Check it out for yourself. Again, I've talked about it in more detail in other videos, but basically the premise is that it does make attacking walled cities more challenging, and it does so in realistic ways that I think are vast improvements over vanilla. All right, so now let's get into one of the new ones that I've not talked about before. I just recently discovered this, even though it's been on the workshop for a while, and I think it's a really good idea. This is Strategic Garrisons by Gray Malkin. And I'm going to take a minute here to read through what he says in terms of context as well as the gameplay changes. Defense buildings in Total War Warhammer 3 have a very limited gameplay function to add garrisons to settlements, but historical castles were built on strategic locations to allow control over surrounding territories. They were not only easy to defend, but also could not be ignored by the enemy, since troops could sally out at any time to disrupt supply lines and foraging parties. That's why armies didn't simply ignore them and push forward. They had to deal with them somehow, which often implied engaging in a long and costly siege. Fortifications were connected with each other to provide relief in case of an attack. Thus, castles were an essential part of military supply lines. I really like the way that he succinctly explains that, and it's certainly true. And it's kind of what I alluded to earlier when I said strong points are just missing in this game. You don't have the capability to build forts on the map with your armies or anything like that. So the only thing the game really has to offer are the pre-existing settlements in the game. And in terms of functioning as strong points, they're woefully inadequate in vanilla. This mod is going to help with that. So gameplay changes. This mod allows defense buildings to reduce recruitment times and increase recruitment capacity in their province. The most formidable fortifications provide so much control over the territory that they reduce the movement range of enemy armies in the area. The following changes to defense buildings affect armies in their province. So we've got minor tier 1 and tier 2, basically buffs / debuffs to recruitment. Actually, no, I'm sorry, they're all buffs to recruitment duration and recruitment capacity. And then at tier 3, enemy armies' movement range is reduced by 30%. All tiers include the effects of the previous ones. In my experience, you won't find many tier 3 defense buildings on your campaigns because the AI tends to not have time to build them or chooses not to before you have painted half the map. Well, we're going to hopefully somewhat rectify that. But anyway, when you do find them, you can find it can take several turns to approach the fortress and lay siege on it. This is by design, of course, but if you find it frustrating, consider sending an agent to damage the walls before you bring your armies into the province. Damaged major T3 defense buildings reduce enemies' army movement range by 15%. So I like this. This, again, makes other strategic decisions in the game more impactful. Like now all of a sudden you're motivated to actually use your agents to do agent actions as opposed to just stacking them in your army or things like that. So things like this that improve other aspects of the game I'm very much in favor of. So to me, all this feels realistic. It feels like it makes improvements to what these garrison buildings are providing besides just more units. And that's going to be important as well when we start talking about changing the garrison composition. So what you're going to end up seeing is if you use a garrison mod, it actually makes the garrison buildings by default less valuable, but then you add in a mod like this and all of a sudden they're back to adding real value. So I highly recommend that. Another point that he makes here is it's compatible with everything, including mods that change how garrisons work. I consciously didn't add features provided by existing mods. He mentions Greater Garrisons by Zorbaz here. This way you can mix them together to get your own desired result. I recommend combining my mod with Hertz playable garrisons to represent your castle's ability to sally out and engage those full enough to approach your best defended settlements. Now, I'm going to amend what he says here because I don't recommend Hertz playable garrisons. I'll go ahead and jump into the next mod that I do recommend instead. I recommend Sally for Garrison Buildings by Mod. This is basically, again, what it says on the tin. This mod enables the Sally for Garrison Buildings. Now, the difference between this and Hertz is that the Hertz Garrison Sally just automatically allows you to, I think it automatically allows you to do it with any of your settlements, whereas this one requires the garrison building for you to be able to do it. And the reason why I think that's important is because, again, it gives you more of a reason to build that garrison building. It does, if you start to improve your garrisons using a garrison mod, it kind of minimizes the impact of your garrison building, but to me, it makes good sense for those garrison buildings to impact the game in other ways, like the ones that are included in the mod I just mentioned, and now in this one as well. This one not only motivates you to build the garrison building so that you can sally out, but also it motivates you to increase the tier of your garrison building in order to increase the range with which you can sally out. So there's an additional importance to your strategic decisions about building this particular building. All right, the last ones that I want to mention when we're talking about the mechanics part of sieges, this one is More Consistent Siege Attackers by Antagonistes. This basically changes, well, it removes Siege Attacker from a lot of your legendary lords and units that don't feel like they should have them, and it just tries to make it more consistent in terms of which units have Siege Attacker and which ones don't. The reason why I think this is really important is because you want siege equipment to be more impactful in a siege battle. Siege equipment should be a really important part of siege battles, and like we alluded to earlier, there are problems with the gate bug and the AI pathfinding in siege battles, and the more use that you make of siege equipment, in particular like siege towers, which let each of your units get up on the walls, that is going to at least mitigate some of the negative impacts of the gate bug and the pathfinding. So anyway, this mod, by removing Siege Attacker from some of your legendary, well, really most of your legendary lords and some of your other units, it's going to then make the things that really do focus on siege attacking, things like your artillery and, of course, your siege equipment. It's going to make those more important. And on that same note then, we have Faster Siege Equipment Construction. This is from Zeke, and basically you can build an awful lot of your siege equipment in a single turn. It's going to feel overpowered to some people, and I understand that. It all kind of depends on just how long of a period of time you think one turn is in this game. I don't think the game specifies it, so there's going to be people who feel like, okay, the ability to build a bunch of battering rams or siege towers in the span of however long one turn lasts is going to feel like it's too strong. I like it. To me, I feel like at the very least, a single turn is multiple weeks, which does give you a lot of time for your engineers to build things. Engineers did travel with armies. They were responsible for doing things like building siege equipment. You know, realistically speaking, I don't have a problem with building siege equipment faster than what it can be in vanilla. But more importantly, from a functional perspective, as I mentioned already, I think siege equipment is a really important aspect of siege battles, or at least it should be. and it's really not in the vanilla game. So I'm in favor of things like this that do make siege equipment more impactful on your game. And then one more in the same vein, which is I never understood why in vanilla Warhammer you can't build siege equipment outside gates and forts. Maybe somebody can explain to me what the rationale is behind that, but it never made sense to me. So when you roll up to, is it Helmgart? Is that the one in the Empire? You roll up to that and you try to attack this major fort at a choke point through the mountains, and the game just flat out will not allow you to build any siege equipment. I do not understand it. So anyway, this mod will allow you to do that. All right, now, so that does it for the mods that are specific to the game's mechanics. But now what I want to talk about are the mods that change and really improve the garrison composition. So we're talking about more units, or we're talking about better units. And the reason why I think this is important, again, is because since the game doesn't allow you to really build any strong points on your own on the fly, you kind of have to rely on the settlements to be those strong points. And so I feel like it's more important that those strong points should at least have better defenses than what we see in vanilla. In the vanilla game, you see minor settlements all the way up to tier 3. You just see them flipping every single turn. It's just they're barely even speed bumps to the movement of armies around the map. I personally feel like the game is improved by slowing that down, taking away some of that steamrolling, making it more of a challenge to take over these strong points. Now, you've got a couple of different choices that you can do with respect to a garrison improvement mod. These would be mutually exclusive. You, for the most part, are not going to want to have more than one of these. So the first one, and probably the most popular one, which again I do like, is Greater Garrisons. This is by Zevon now. He used to be Zorbaz. I've talked about this one before. You can read the description to see exactly what it does. One thing to keep in mind is that as it is adding more units to your garrisons, it does not on its own give spells to the spellcasters that are by default in some of your garrisons. It never made sense to me that you've got wizards that don't have any spells, and that's a flaw in the vanilla game. Yet another flaw in the vanilla game. So he does recommend here, he actually has it as a required. This is the abilities and spells for garrison heroes. I also would recommend getting that mod as well if the garrison mod that you are choosing to go with doesn't already do that, doesn't already make sure that all of your spellcasters have spells. Now, another option, if you didn't want to go with the Zevon Greater Garrisons mod, you've got Dynamic Garrisons with full settlement strength. This is by Suiting Ghost. Again, I'm going to recommend that you read through the details here in terms of what exactly it does. But again, a lot of your different buildings, not just your garrison building and settlement building, but a lot of your buildings do provide additional units. And when you compare it to something like Zevon's Greater Garrisons, again, it's really a very subjective thing. It's your own personal tastes as much as anything else. And then finally, a new one that I just discovered and I have started playing around with it is Sensical Garrisons for all factions. This is by Ragnarok. I quite like this so far. I've only tested it in a few campaigns, so I haven't really gotten as much of a feel for it as some of the others. But this adds a lot more in the way of heroes to your garrisons. And overall, this one kind of feels to me like the strongest of any of them. So if you kind of want to go all in on strengthening garrisons, you will, this is probably the one to go with. In the background here, I'm showing an example of some of the garrison units that get added by all of the various buildings. And as you can see, there's quite a lot. So in the case of the Skaven, for example, I've got a size 20 garrison on turn number 1 here at Crookback Mountain. Now that is because there is a landmark that you start with in this city And most of the time, you're not going to have this, but at the very least, you can get a sense of, yeah, this mod really makes garrisons quite strong, even for some of your lower tier settlements. So it's probably going to be considered OP by a lot of people. But like I said, if you want to lean in towards making your settlements as strong as any of the mods, this one is probably the one that you want to go with. Now, be aware that this landmark does add quite a lot of strength to your garrison. I have noticed there's some variability there, so there are some other landmarks that don't add quite as much. But as you can see, all of your military recruitment buildings add military units that really pretty much correspond to what the building allows you to recruit, which I think makes sense. And then even your economic buildings do provide usually lower tier units, but also in some cases heroes as well. So there's really an abundance of garrison units that get added by this mod. And we'll compare it to what you get with the Dark Elves. This is an example of where your landmarks don't provide quite as many or as strong units. They're still good, but not quite the 20 at turn 1 that Tretch had in Crookback Mountain. But still, you've got the military recruitment buildings that add the matching type of garrison unit, and your infrastructure, economic buildings that add some units as well. And even your torch building, your protection building, this could conceivably give you a reason to build those as well, because those add to your garrison as well. Now, I just want to reiterate the point that I made earlier, which is because you're getting so many garrison units from all of these other buildings, it does on its own make building the garrison building less important, less impactful on your game. That's why I really recommend, however, using those other mods like strategic garrisons, which really make having that garrison building much more important. Likewise, using the Sally for garrison buildings. So you've got other reasons to build those garrison buildings, not just for the units that they add. All right, and I think I'll go ahead and wrap this video up there then. I think we've covered quite a few things in this video. Like I said before, I'm sure others of you could recommend some others that maybe supplement what we've got on this list, maybe in some cases replace what we've got on this list, but I think this is a pretty good starting point then for a discussion. These are the mods that I'm currently using and having great success with. So I'll leave it at that. I hope you found this useful. I hope some of you can incorporate these into your own campaigns and see improvements in your own campaigns. But as always, I welcome any feedback as long as you keep it civil, which for the most part, people have been really good about doing. All right, anyway, with all that, I think I'll go ahead and say thank you all so much for watching and listening, and I will see you all in the next video.